As Matthias Cormann. Good morning. Welcome.
Good morning, Barry.
Did senior ministers in the Turnbull government seriously believe that you could persuade the premiers to levy their own income taxes?
It was important for the proposition to be put because, in Australia we do face a structural challenge, and that is that our spending across a range of areas is growing faster than the revenue that we are able to raise out of the economy. And obviously, the states have been coming to the Commonwealth asking us to help them with their spending, asking us to increase our taxes in order to help them with their spending on their schools and their hospitals. And what we've said to the states is, we are prepared to give you the opportunity to raise more revenue, to have access to a growth revenue source, to give you a direct stake in your future economic success and get a revenue growth dividend from growing your economy more successfully by vacating a proportion of income tax and giving you the opportunity to raise income tax in order to better fund the various services that you provide. So the states have said.
So you're saying it was important to put that proposition to the premiers, but with little chance of success. Surely you must have seen that the Prime Minister would have to take some political damage for that.
I don't agree at all. At least now we know where we stand. We know that all of us, state and federal governments, have got to live within our means. The state governments, and I heard Premier Baird in your opening clips say that the New South Wales government is not in the business of increasing taxes. Well, neither is the federal government. And so what it means is that the envelope from within which we have to fund the services provided to the Australian community is the envelope in front of us, and we all have to live within our means, and we've got to make judgments on how we prioritise expenditure within that envelope.
Yeah, but living within your means and providing adequate funding for adequate services is a different thing altogether. And that's what the federal government has to do. You have to provide enough money to the states so that they can provide an adequate service.
Well, actually, the states have to make their own judgments about how they raise their revenue in order to provide funding for state schools and state hospitals. What the states have said to the Commonwealth is that we have a problem because our expenditure on hospitals increases more quickly than our revenue, and we want you, the Commonwealth, to help us fill up the gap. And they're saying to us that we need you, the Commonwealth, to increase expenditure on our hospitals faster than your revenue is growing. Well, that doesn't work. And so what we're saying is, well, OK, either we work together on how we can ensure the system works better, or you've got to find a better way to spend your money more wisely. OK,
you obviously still then believe in the concept of the states levying their own income taxes. Will you bring the idea back?
No. Obviously, the proposition was put, and this was meant to be the beginning of a process at COAC last week. Obviously, the response from the states was overwhelming, except for the Premier from Western Australia. No state actually was prepared to entertain this idea any further, so that idea is now off the table. What we have agreed, though, is that we will now engage in a process with the states to look at some of the tight grants that are provided by the Commonwealth to the states, and to see whether there is a more efficient way to provide that money, to untie some of those grants, to ensure that we spend less money on administration of money flows between the Commonwealth and the states, and more money on actually delivering services.
And that would be linked with a sharing of a certain percentage of income taxes, as opposed to levying their own.
Well, that is the proposal to be explored, and there's more work to be done, and the Treasurer, Scott Morrison, will be exploring that with state and territory treasurers in the coming weeks and months.
Now, more broadly on the economy, expenditure as a percentage of GDP is running at 26%. That's where it was at the height of the global financial crisis. You've been in government for 2 years. Is that good enough?
Well, we inherited a spending growth trajectory from the previous government, which was legislated and which was locked in. And you might remember, in particular in relation to schools and hospitals, the Gillard government made unfunded, unaffordable, pie-in-the-sky spending promises, which started to ramp up, in particular, in years 5 and 6 after their period in government. So, we've been working to turn that situation around. And if you look at expenditure as a share of GDP, it is is forecast to be 25.9%
that's
this
a
year, and
forecast.
to reduce over the forward estimates to 25.3%. So we are now on an improving trajectory. When we came into government, we were on a trajectory of spending as a share of GDP of 26.5%, and the intergenerational report actually showed that if we hadn't changed Labor's policy settings, we would have tracked in excess of towards in excess of 30% government spending as a share of GDP. So we have turned that trajectory around. We are now heading in the right direction. But you are right. I mean, we did inherit from the previous government a spending growth trajectory that was unfunded and unaffordable.
But that's a trajectory. The reality is it's at 26%. It's still at GFC levels. For how long can you keep using as an excuse it's at 26% because you inherited this 2 years ago?
We did inherit a forward trajectory, of course we did, and if we had not made any adjustments to policy settings, the situation we would be in now would be worse. We are now heading in the right direction. We're heading in a direction where spending as a share of GDP is projected to reduce, whereas when we came into government, spending as a share of GDP was projected to increase to 26.5% by 23-24, and even higher than that in the period beyond that. We are now on a reducing trajectory. Our ambition is to bring that down further, but I mean that is of course why it is important that we properly address some of the issues that we inherited from the previous government, including their unfunded, unsustainable, unaffordable, pie-in-the-sky spending promises which they made to the states in relation to state schools and state hospitals. Well,
if you're debating bringing the deficit down, of course there's this never-ending argument about whether the country has both a spending and a revenue problem. Now, Mike Baird, a Liberal Premier, and Jay Weatherill, a Labor Premier, said after COAG they think the country has both. Is the federal government ready to concede that?
Well, I heard Mike Baird say in your opening clip how the New South Wales government is not in the business of increasing taxes. Well, neither is the federal government. We have a revenue problem to the extent that our economic growth is not as strong as we would like it to be, and all of us, the federal government and state and territory governments, have a responsibility to ensure we put the policy settings in place to maximise growth. The stronger our growth, the stronger our job creation, the more well-paying jobs are created in the economy, the better our capacity to increase revenue moving forward. But if we want to strengthen revenue growth by strengthening economic growth, the worst thing that we could do would be to increase the overall tax burden. The conversation we need to have is how we can ensure that the revenue for government, state and federal, is raised in the most efficient, least distorting way in the economy. That is the conversation the Commonwealth has been seeking to have with the states, and obviously that is going to be an ongoing conversation.
But can't you raise revenue without necessarily raising taxes? For example, taking away some of the concessions that are now available.
Well, look, I mean, in any budget, you look at the revenue and the expenditure side of the budget to see, whether you can spend more efficiently and more effectively and better target your expenditure and make sensible adjustments to the spending growth trajectory. And you look at the revenue side of your budget to see whether there are ways that you can improve the quality of your revenue raising. I mean, in the end, we can put fancy words around it, but if you make changes to tax laws that lead to increases in revenue, that is an increase in taxation. Now, that is not necessarily, I mean, in the end what you've got to look at is your overall tax burden, and what I'm saying is the Commonwealth, the same as Mike Baird has said about the state governments, is not in the business of increasing taxes overall. We are open to the conversation of improving the way the revenue for the Commonwealth is raised, the way taxes are raised, and in that context obviously there's always a live conversation about whether you can make adjustments to certain parts of the tax system in order to ensure your tax system is as efficient and as fair as possible. But
you still seem to have this ideological opposition to raising taxes per se, and yet are you listening to independent advice? Because CEDA, for example, that's an organisation that is a credible think tank. It has the support of business, of governments, and they say by a factor of 6 to 1, the answer to bringing down the deficit is to raise revenue ahead of spending cuts.
Well, this is not an ideological obsession. This is driven by our total commitment to strengthening growth, strengthening job creation, so that people across Australia have the best possible opportunity to get ahead. Now, if we want to increase economic growth, and we do, then the last thing you'd want to do is to increase the overall tax burden in the economy. The conversation when it comes to the tax system is all about how we can raise our tax revenue better, how we can raise it more efficiently in a least distorting way in the economy, so that we least detract from economic growth opportunities in the future. It is not about increasing the overall tax burden in the economy.
Minister, thanks for your time this morning. Appreciate it.
Always good to talk to you.